She rescued a trapped elderly woman. What followed changed her life forever. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon. The sun was shining gently over Maple Street, casting warm light across the sidewalks and lawns. Birds chirped from tall trees, and somewhere nearby, a lawnmower hummed softly. It felt like any other peaceful day in the neighborhood. Children's laughter echoed in the distance, and wind chimes danced lazily in the breeze. Lila, an 8-year-old girl with big, curious eyes and colorful beads in her hair, was riding her bright yellow bicycle down the street. She loved riding on Saturdays. It felt like flying. Her feet pedaled fast, her cheeks rosy from the wind, and her giggles floated into the air as she swerved carefully past parked cars. Whoosh! She whispered to herself. Pretending she was on an adventure, she waved at Mr. Rodriguez, who was trimming his rose bushes. "Hola, Lila. Not too fast now," he called with a smile. "I won't," she called back with a grin. Lila knew everyone on the street. They knew her too. She was the kind of kid who always said hello, helped carry groceries, or picked up litter without being asked. She didn't do it for attention. It was just who she was. As she rounded the corner, something caught her eye. A car. It wasn't parked the way it should have been. It looked off. It sat crookedly on a driveway, its back end pressed against a large oak tree. The driver's side door was open just a little, like someone had gotten out or maybe tried to. But what really made Lila stop was the silence. No one was near the car. No one was coming out of the house. She slowed her bike to a stop, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. "That's Mrs. Harper's car," she whispered to herself. Mrs. Harper lived in the old gray house with the faded curtains and the quiet porch. She always sat in her rocking chair, barely moving, watching the world go by but never really being part of it. Most people didn't talk to her. They said she was grumpy or didn't like visitors. But Lila didn't believe that. A few days ago, she had waved to Mrs. Harper, and to her surprise, the old woman had given the smallest smile. Now, something didn't feel right. Lila got off her bike, left it on the sidewalk, and slowly walked toward the car. Her flip-flops slapped lightly against the concrete. As she got closer, she noticed something that made her breath catch in her throat. A hand. It was just barely visible, reaching out from under the side of the car. "Mrs. Harper?" Lila said, her voice suddenly small. No answer. She took another step. That's when she heard it, a faint, shaky voice, almost too quiet to hear. "Help. Please." Lila's eyes went wide. Her heart thudded in her chest. It was Mrs. Harper. She was trapped. She didn't scream or cry. Something inside her knew she had to stay calm. Her mom always told her, "If something scary happens, take a breath, then think of the next right thing to do." Lila looked up and down the street. No one else was outside. No one had heard. But she remembered. Mr. Lee lived just a few houses down. He used to fix cars. He was strong. He could help. Lila ran. She ran faster than she ever had before, her flip-flops nearly falling off. Her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Her only thought was, "Get to Mr. Lee. Hurry." She banged on his door breathless. "Mr. Lee, please, it's Mrs. Harper. She's under her car. She's stuck. We have to help." Mr. Lee, a kind older man with oil-stained hands and a big heart, opened the door with a puzzled look. "Slow down, Lila. What's going on?" She tried to explain between gasps. "She's hurt. No one else saw. It's really bad, please. Come now." Mr. Lee didn't ask more questions. He grabbed his tool bag and followed her, his steps quick and heavy. As they ran back toward the house, Lila pointed. "There. See? She's under there." She said, "Help." Mr. Lee's face turned serious. "Stay back, okay? Let me look." He crouched down beside the car. A few long seconds passed. Then he turned to Lila, his voice low but urgent. "She's really stuck. This is bad. We need help. I'm going to get some things from my garage. Lila, I need you to stay here with her. Talk to her. Keep her awake." Lila nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of what was happening. She got down on her knees near the side of the car. "I'm here, Mrs. Harper," she said gently. "I'm not leaving. We're going to get you out, okay?" A faint whisper came back. "Thank you. I was so scared." Lila reached her small hand toward hers, just enough for their fingers to touch. "It's okay," Lila said softly. "You're not alone now." And for the first time in a very long time, Mrs. Harper believed it. Mr. Lee rushed back to his house, leaving Lila kneeling next to the car, her small hand still gently touching Mrs. Harper's trembling fingers. The old woman's skin felt cold and fragile, and her hand shook with every shallow breath. "Just hold on," Lila whispered. "You're gonna be okay." She tried to sound brave, like her mom did when she was calming patients at the hospital. But deep down, Lila felt her own fear creeping in. She had never seen someone so hurt or so scared. Mrs. Harper's voice was barely more than a whisper. I didn't think anyone would hear me." "I heard you," Lila said softly. "I was just riding by. I saw your car, and I just knew something was wrong." Mrs. Harper let out a weak sound, part sigh, part laugh. "You've got good eyes, little one. Better than most adults around here." Lila didn't answer right away. She glanced around. People were still inside their homes. The sound of a basketball bouncing a few streets over echoed faintly, but nobody else had come out. It was strange how a normal day could keep going while something this serious was happening. "Where's Mr. Lee?" Mrs. Harper asked after a moment, her voice tightening with pain. "He's getting tools. He said we need to make the car safe before we try to move you," Lila explained. "I think he knows what he's doing." Mrs. Harper let out a breath. "Good man, that one." Just then, the sound of footsteps thudded quickly on the sidewalk. Mr. Lee returned, arms full of wooden blocks, a large metal jack, and a small flashlight tucked under his arm. He knelt beside the car again and gently touched Lila's shoulder. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lila nodded. "She's talking to me. I think that's good, right?" Mr. Lee gave a tight smile. "It's very good. You're doing perfect. Just keep her talking." He got to work quickly, sliding the jack under one side of the car, inspecting the points where it could lift without shifting the weight dangerously. His hands moved fast but carefully, with the kind of focus that only comes from years of knowing how fragile situations can be. Mrs. Harper moaned as the metal groaned beneath her. "Stay with me, Mrs. Harper," Lila said quickly. "Can you tell me something like, what's your favorite cookie?" The old woman blinked, confused, then gave a tiny smile. "Oatmeal raisin, with a pinch of cinnamon. My daughter used to bake them, every Sunday." "You had a daughter?" Lila asked gently. Mrs. Harper nodded slowly. "Long time ago. She was about your age when she started baking with me. You remind me of her. Brave. Gentle." Lila felt her throat tighten. She didn't know what to say to that, so she just squeezed Mrs. Harper's hand a little tighter. Mr. Lee looked up suddenly. "Lila, can you run to my shed and grab the blue toolbox? It's right on the shelf to the left." "Okay," she said, springing up and running as fast as she could. When she returned, toolbox in hand, she saw that another neighbor, Mr. Thompson, had finally come out onto his porch. He called over, "Everything all right over there?" "No!" Lila shouted, back. "She's stuck under her car." Mr. Thompson squinted. "What? Really?" Before Lila could respond, Mr. Lee raised his voice, urgent and clear. "Jack, we need help. She's pinned and I can't lift this alone." That finally got the man moving. He jogged over, eyes widening as he saw the scene up close. "Oh, No? I thought it was just a bump against the tree. She's been under there almost 10 minutes, Mr. Lee said sharply. Grab some more blocks and tell your wife to call 911. We need an ambulance. Mr. Thompson turned and ran. Within minutes, more neighbors started appearing. Mrs. Patel came from across the street, holding her phone and looking worried. The Rodriguez twins ran up with pieces of scrap wood from their garage. Even people Lila barely recognized were arriving now, drawn by the urgency and the panic in the air. And through it all, Lila stayed beside Mrs. Harper. She kept her voice steady. You're going to be okay. Help is here. Mr. Lee and the others are lifting the car. The ambulance is coming. Tears slipped from the old woman's eyes. Thank you for not leaving me. I wouldn't, Lila said simply. You smiled at me once, remember? That meant something to me. Now I want to give you something back. A few feet away, Mr. Lee gave the signal. With a groan of metal and a rush of effort, the car shifted just enough to relieve some pressure from Mrs. Harper's leg. She gasped, but it was a sound of relief. This time, not pain. Sirens began to echo in the distance. They're coming, Lila whispered. They're coming for you now. Mrs. Harper gave the smallest nod. I believe you. Lila leaned forward and gave her hand one more squeeze. You're not alone anymore. You've got me. And now the whole neighborhood, too. The sirens grew louder, echoing off the houses and down the quiet street like a promise. Lila didn't move from Mrs. Harper's side. Even as people started to gather, even as neighbors who had never spoken more than a polite, hello, now, stood shoulder to shoulder, eyes wide and anxious, Lila stayed where she was. Her little hand still wrapped around the old woman's trembling fingers. Mr. Lee stood, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. She's stable for now, he said to the small crowd forming. We got just enough lift to ease the pressure, but we can't move the car further without the paramedics. People murmured, uneasy. The truth was, they were shaken. Not just because of the accident, but because it had taken a child to notice, a child to act, a child to care. Mr. Thompson rubbed the back of his neck and looked down at the pavement. He still hadn't said much since realizing the seriousness of what had happened. He'd been one of the first to hear the crash, and yet, he had stayed inside. I thought she was fine, he finally said aloud, mostly to himself. I just figured, she's old, maybe embarrassed, didn't want to fuss. No one answered, but the silence said enough. The ambulance pulled up moments later, followed by a fire truck. Bright lights flashed across Maple Street, bathing the rows of houses in red and white. The moment the paramedics stepped out, Lila felt her heart leap with hope. One of them, a kind-faced woman with gray streaks in her ponytail, knelt beside her. Are you the one who found her? She asked gently, placing a hand on Lila's back. Lila nodded. She was under her car. I heard, She said help. You did a very brave thing, the paramedic said, offering her a soft smile. We'll take it from here, but you helped save her life. Just remember that. Lila stood slowly, letting go of Mrs. Harper's hand as the paramedics began working. They checked her pulse, asked her questions, and moved with calm but quick precision. Firefighters began to take over the car lifting effort with special equipment, guiding it up just enough to fully free her. The moment the weight shifted, Mrs. Harper gasped and cried out. But this time, there was a kind of release in her voice, like fear was finally letting go of her chest. As they lifted her onto the stretcher, her eyes darted toward Lila through the crowd. Lila, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Lila stepped forward, and a path seemed to open naturally between the adults. I'm right here, she said. The old woman reached out her hand, and Lila held it tight for just a moment. More. You are my angel, Mrs. Harper whispered. Don't ever forget that. I won't, Lila said softly. Then, Just like that, Mrs. Harper was lifted into the ambulance. The doors shut gently, and within seconds it rolled away, the lights still, flashing down the street. The moment it disappeared, a quiet stillness settled over the block. The crowd lingered, awkward at first, as if unsure what to do now that the crisis was over. Mr. Lee turned toward Lila's mother, Tanya, who had just arrived, breathless and pale. She'd gotten a call from Mr. Rodriguez, who saw everything from his porch and told her what Lila had done. "You raised one incredible little girl," Mr. Lee said quietly. "She didn't just help Mrs. Harper, she woke all of us up." Tanya pulled Lila into a tight hug, one hand pressed firmly against the back of her daughter's head. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. So proud. Lila leaned into the hug, her body finally relaxing. She didn't realize how tense she'd been until that moment. Her legs felt like jelly, her cheeks still warm from all the running and crying and hoping. And yet, she felt calm. She felt full. The neighbors didn't rush back into their homes. Like usual, they lingered, talking quietly, asking questions. Someone brought out a pitcher of lemonade and paper cups. Another neighbor pulled up folding chairs. It was strange and comforting at the same time. Like suddenly, everyone realized they shared something. Mr. Thompson, still shaken, looked down at Lila. "I didn't check when I heard the crash," he said, voice cracking. "I just assumed someone else would." "I'm sorry, Lila." She looked up at him, thoughtful. "It's okay," she said. "Sometimes people get scared, but you're here now. That's what matters." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. People started sharing their thoughts out loud about how little they knew each other, even after years of living side by side. How no one had seen Mrs. Harper much more than a shadow on her porch. How they all thought they were too busy to stop, or too polite to ask. It became clear, as the sun began to dip in the sky, that this wasn't just about one accident. It was about the walls between them. Walls built not out of hate, but of habit, of quietness, of assuming everyone was okay, if their grass was cut and their trash was out on time. That night, the neighbors made a promise, right there on the sidewalk, under a fading sky, to check in. To show up, to stop looking away. And it all started because an 8-year-old girl saw a car at a strange angle and chose to care. The next morning, the sun rose over Maple Street just like it always did. But something was different. You could feel it in the air. There were still birds chirping in the trees, sprinklers running on timers, and wind chimes tinkling in the breeze. But now, there was something new floating through the neighborhood, a sense of awareness, a quiet understanding. Everyone knew what had happened the day before, and they all knew who had changed everything. Inside the Johnson house, Lila sat at the kitchen table, slowly stirring her cereal, though she wasn't eating. Her spoon clinked against the bowl, but her mind was far away, still kneeling beside Mrs. Harper, still hearing her shaky voice asking for help, still feeling the tight squeeze of her frail hand. Across the kitchen, Tanya poured herself a cup of coffee and watched her daughter quietly. "You didn't sleep much last night, huh?" she asked softly. Lila shook her head. "I kept thinking about her, about how long she was stuck under that car, and how no one knew. It makes me sad." Tanya pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "I know, baby. I've seen things like that at the hospital. People hurting, but nobody noticing. That's why we help. That's why we pay attention." Lila looked up at her mom, her eyes tired but still curious. "Do you think she's okay? I mean, really okay?" Tanya reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "She's in good hands now, and she's alive because of you." There was a quiet pause before Lila said, "I want to see her." Tanya smiled gently. "I already called the hospital. She's awake. And when she found out you wanted to visit, she started crying. Happy tears, though. Lila's eyes lit up for the first time that morning. They arrived at the hospital a few hours later. The hallways were cold and clean, and the smell of hand sanitizer lingered in the air. Lila held her mom's hand tight as they walked toward room 2113. Inside, Mrs. Harper lay in bed, her leg wrapped in a cast, her face pale but calm. She turned when she heard the door open, and when she saw Lila, she smiled. Truly smiled. For the first time in what felt like forever. "There she is," she whispered. "My little hero." Lila hesitated at the door, suddenly nervous. "Hi," she said, voice quiet. Mrs. Harper lifted her hand. "Come on over, child." Lila moved to her bedside and gently took her hand again, just like she had under the car. It was still thin and bony, but stronger now. Warmer. "You okay?" Lila asked. "I will be," Mrs. Harper said. "Thanks to you." The doctor said another 15 minutes under that car and, well, it would have been a different story. Lila didn't answer right away. Her eyes welled with quiet tears. She blinked quickly and looked down. "I'm just glad I was there," she whispered. "I don't like to think about what would have happened if I wasn't." Mrs. Harper gave her hand a soft squeeze. "Let me tell you something. I thought I was alone. I really did. After I lost my daughter, and then my husband, I stopped believing in people. I thought the world had passed me by." She looked at Lila with eyes that carried years of grief. "But then you showed up," she continued. "A little girl with braids and a bike. And you reminded me that people still care. That kindness still exists." Lila looked up at her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Mrs. Harper said, "You know what I miss the most?" "What?" Lila asked. "Baking," the old woman replied, a small smile curling at the corners of her mouth. "Cookies, cakes, pies. My daughter and I used to bake every Sunday." Lila's face lit up. "I love baking. Me and Mama were going to make you cookies the day before the accident." Mrs. Harper chuckled softly. "Well, I think we'll have to do that now. When I get out of here, that is. You and me. Sunday baking." Lila grinned. "Deal." Tanya stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Mrs. Harper's shoulder. "Is there anything you need while you're here? Books? Music?" Mrs. Harper thought for a moment. "Maybe a little company now and then, just someone to talk to." Tanya nodded. "You'll have that. We're not going anywhere." As they left the hospital later that day, Lila was quiet in the car, her chin resting on the window, watching the trees blur past. Tanya glanced at her. "What are you thinking about, baby?" Lila turned to her with a small, thoughtful smile. "I think I want to help more, not just Mrs. Harper. Everyone. The people on our street, the ones who sit alone, the ones nobody really talks to." Tanya reached over and tucked a curl behind her daughter's ear. "That's a beautiful thing, Lila. And you know what? Helping people doesn't always mean saving lives. Sometimes it just means showing up." As they pulled onto Maple Street, Lila looked out at the houses, the same houses she'd seen her whole life. But now, they looked different. They looked like possibilities. And in that moment, a small idea began to grow in her heart. Something about baking days, and welcome signs, and maybe even getting the neighbors together for something special. She wasn't sure yet what it would become, but she knew one thing for sure. Something had changed. Not just for Mrs. Harper, not just for her, but for all of Maple Street. A few days later, Lila found herself standing on tiptoe at the hospital gift shop, carefully choosing a small book and a bag of lemon drops. "Mama, do you think she'll like this?" she asked, holding up a paperback filled with short stories and poems. Tanya smiled down at her. "I think she'll love it, especially since you picked it just for her." With the book and candy in hand, they made their way back to room 213. Lila knew the path by heart now, past the nurse's station, down the hall that always smelled like fresh sheets and hand soap, then left at the water cooler. When they stepped inside, Mrs. Harper was sitting up this time, propped against fluffy pillows with a warm blanket folded neatly over her lap. Her eyes lit up the second she saw Lila. "Well, if it isn't my little sunshine," she said with a smile that had become more familiar each day. Lila beamed and hurried to her side. "I brought you something." She handed over the book and lemon drops proudly. Mrs. Harper looked at them for a long moment, her fingers brushing gently over the cover. "My daughter used to love lemon drops," she said quietly, her voice soft with memory. "She'd sneak them into my apron pocket. When we baked together, said they were baking fuel," Lila giggled. "Then we're carrying on the tradition." They spent the next hour reading together. Lila took turns with Mrs. Harper, stumbling now and then over big words, but never letting it slow her down. Every time she finished a page, Mrs. Harper would smile and nod like it was the best story she'd ever heard. When Lila finished a short poem about flowers blooming after rain, Mrs. Harper was quiet for a moment. "You know," she said slowly, "I think I've been living like winter. Cold, closed off, just surviving." She turned to Lila, eyes glistening. "But you feel like spring. You brought warmth back into my world." Lila didn't fully understand the weight of those words, but she felt them. She squeezed Mrs. Harper's hand and said, "We can be spring. Together." Mrs. Harper chuckled, wiping at her eyes with a tissue. "Deal." As days turned into a week, Lila continued to visit. Sometimes she brought books, sometimes drawings. Once, she even brought a homemade card that read, "You are not alone anymore." Mrs. Harper taped it right above her hospital bed, where she could see it every morning. And something unexpected began to happen, not just between them, but around them. The nurses at the hospital started stopping by room 213 more often, just to chat or check in. One of them even brought in cookies from her home and offered Lila a baking recipe to try. "Your visits are the best thing that's happened to this room in months," the head nurse told Tanya one afternoon. "You can feel the difference. The air's just lighter in here." Back on Maple Street, the story of what had happened continued to ripple. Mr. Lee began sitting outside more often, cleaning up the sidewalk in front of his house and waving to kids who passed by. Mrs. Patel, who had once only peeked out from behind her curtains, knocked on the Johnsons' door to deliver homemade samosas as a thank you. And Mr. Thompson. Well, Mr. Thompson had changed too. He now made a habit of crossing the street to greet his neighbors every evening. He even asked Lila to help him repaint his old fence, and when she said yes, he gave her a shy, grateful smile that didn't look like the man who used to grumble from his porch. It was like someone had turned on a light. One afternoon, Lila sat on her porch, legs swinging as she waited for Tanya to get ready. They were visiting Mrs. Harper again. But this time, it wasn't just a check-in. This time, they were bringing chocolate chip cookies, still warm, wrapped carefully in a cloth napkin. "Mama?" Lila asked, looking out across the street at Mrs. Harper's house. "Do you think she'll come back home soon?" "I think so," Tanya said, locking the front door behind her. "The doctors said her leg's healing well, maybe just another week or two." "I want to help her when she comes back," Lila said. "Like really help. Clean her porch, bring her books, maybe plant flowers outside her window." Tanya smiled. "Then we will." They arrived at the hospital just in time to catch Mrs. Harper finishing her lunch. The smell of cookies filled the room before Lila even opened the napkin. Mrs. Harper's eyes widened. "Are those what I think they are?" Lila nodded. "Made them this morning. I didn't forget the cinnamon." Mrs. Harper laughed, not the soft chuckle she usually gave, but a full, open laugh that bounced off the hospital walls. "You're a miracle, Lila," she said after taking a bite. "Not because you pulled me from under that car, but because you stayed." Lila looked up at her, puzzled. Stayed? Most people show up in a moment, then disappear, Mrs. Harper said, her voice suddenly tender. But you stayed. You kept showing up. And that's what saved me. Lila wasn't sure what to say, so she just hugged her. No words, just warmth. That night, as they walked home under a sky brushed with gold and orange, Lila glanced at the houses around her. Houses that used to seem so still and closed. Now, she saw lights in windows, laughter on porches, and something else. Possibility. She had started something, not because she planned it, but because she cared. And somehow, that was enough to change everything. The day Mrs. Harper came home was brighter than usual. Not just because the sun was shining, but because there was something in the air on Maple Street. Like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for something that mattered. And for once, everyone agreed on what that was. Lila stood on her front porch, a handmade sign in her arms. She'd painted it herself that morning. "Welcome home, Mrs. Harper," complete with little yellow sunflowers and a smiley face in the corner. Her fingers were still sticky with glue, but her heart felt light. She looked around and saw what used to be a quiet, disconnected street, now alive. Mr. Lee was hanging a string of paper flags between his porch and the Thompsons. Mrs. Patel had made trays of samosas and sweet rice. The twins from down the road were chalking a giant "welcome" on the sidewalk. Even Mr. Thompson, who used to avoid eye contact, was carefully straightening lawn chairs for neighbors to sit in. Everyone had shown up because something had changed. And it had started with a moment no one else had seen. Just a girl, a bicycle, and a gut feeling that something wasn't right. Now, that moment had turned into something bigger. At the end of the block, a familiar blue truck turned the corner. Mr. Lee was driving slowly, careful not to jostle the passenger seat. "There she is!" Lila shouted. Voices called out. Hands waved. And Maple Street came alive with cheers as the truck pulled up in front of Mrs. Harper's faded gray house. Lila ran to the sidewalk just in time to see Mrs. Harper step carefully out of the truck, her cane in one hand, Mr. Lee's arm steadying the other. Her leg was still healing, and her steps were slow, but her eyes were wide and her lips trembled into a real smile, the kind of smile people hadn't seen in years. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, looking around at the decorations, the food, the neighbors gathered in front of her house. "You did all this?" Lila stepped forward, her voice proud but soft. "We wanted to welcome you back." Mrs. Harper's eyes found Lila's. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Lila said. "Just be home." Tears welled up in Mrs. Harper's eyes. She leaned into Mr. Lee and whispered, "I thought I'd come back to a house, but it feels like I've come back to a family." Neighbors clapped and offered hugs and helped her up the path, where a small table was set with lemonade and cookies, including a fresh plate of chocolate chip, still warm from the Johnson's oven. Lila stuck close, not to be the center of attention, but just to be there, quietly helping, gently asking Mrs. Harper if she needed a pillow behind her back, pouring her a glass of water before she even asked. It didn't go unnoticed. As the little gathering continued into the early evening, people began sharing stories, not just about the accident, but about memories from the street, funny moments, hard times, moments they hadn't spoken about in years because they never had a reason to gather before. One by one, people admitted the same thing. "We've lived here so long, but never really knew each other." That's when Mr. Thompson cleared his throat and stood beside the picnic table, holding his lemonade like a microphone. "I've been thinking," he said, "about all of this, about how fast things can change, and how easy it is to go through life thinking you're alone, even when you're surrounded by people." He looked at Mrs. Harper, then at Lila. "I almost didn't come out the day of the accident. I heard the crash, but I didn't check, and I'll carry that with me for a long time. But I also saw what one kid did. What we all could have done. Lila lowered her eyes, but she felt her mom's hand on her shoulder. Steady, proud. So here's my idea, Mr. Thompson continued. What if we stopped waiting for big moments to remind us we're neighbors? What if we made it a habit to check on each other, share meals, help out? He paused, then added, and I think Lila should be in charge of organizing it. Heads turned. Lila blinked, surprised. Me? It took 2 months to turn Mrs. Harper's idea into something real. 2 months of hammering, painting, cleaning, planning, and most of all, believing. Neighbors who used to barely wave at each other now worked side by side. Retired folks brought out tools they hadn't used in years. Teenagers offered to paint and clean. Kids helped plant flowers in the front yard. Even the grumpy mailman, who barely said a word before, brought snacks and stayed for updates, and at the center of it all was Lila, her clipboard in one hand, a snack in the other, going from person to person like she'd done it all her life. I'm just making sure everyone feels welcome, she told her mom one day as they painted. The window frame's sky blue. Because I think that's the secret, Mama. Some people don't want help. They just want to feel included. Tanya smiled and kissed her on the forehead. You're wiser than most adults I know. Finally, the day came. The Maple Street Community Room, a cozy section of Mrs. Harper's house, opened with a small ribbon-cutting ceremony on a sunny Saturday morning. It wasn't fancy. The sign out front was hand-painted. The chairs inside didn't match. There were scratches on the floor and mismatched mugs in the kitchenette. But it was perfect, because every inch of that space was built with kindness, by people who showed up not out of duty, but out of heart. Lila stood next to Mrs. Harper as she held the big red ribbon across the entryway. Neighbors gathered around, smiling, many holding plates of food or folding chairs. Kids played with chalk on the sidewalk. Someone played soft music from a speaker. Mrs. Harper turned to Lila and said, "Would you do the honors, sweetheart?" Lila's eyes widened. Me? Mrs. Harper handed her the scissors. It all started with you, and now it belongs to all of us. Lila took a deep breath. She looked at the crowd, familiar faces, new smiles, people she once thought she'd never talked to. She raised the scissors and cut the ribbon. A cheer erupted, and just like that, something that had once been a quiet, lonely house became a heartbeat. Inside the community room, laughter filled the air. People walked around admiring the bookshelves, the cozy reading corner, the bulletin board full of events. Movie night, hosted by Mr. Thompson, cooking class with Mrs. Patel, kids' story hour, Wednesdays at 4 p.m., but the most special thing in the room was a small framed picture near the door. A photo of Lila and Mrs. Harper, taken just a week earlier. Below it, a plaque read, "In honor of the girl who reminded us all, one small act of kindness can change everything." Lila stared at it for a while. She didn't feel famous or important, she just felt happy. Later that afternoon, while people played board games and passed around pie, Lila stepped outside for some air. She sat on the porch steps with a cookie in her hand, watching the street. It looked the same, but it felt completely different. A quiet voice spoke beside her. "Room for one more?" It was Mrs. Harper, leaning carefully on her cane. Lila scooted over to make space. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching kids ride bikes and parents laugh. "I never imagined this," Mrs. Harper said softly. "Not just the center, but feeling alive again." "You think it'll last?" Lila asked. Mrs. Harper gave a small smile. "That depends on us, on whether we keep choosing each other, every day." "I want to," Lila said. "I want to keep helping people, not just here, everywhere." "You will," Mrs. Harper replied. "You're already doing it." A little boy ran up then, holding a juice box, his eyes wide. "Are you the girl who saved that old lady?" he asked, pointing inside. Lila blinked, caught off guard. I guess? He looked impressed. My mom said you're like a real-life hero. I want to be like you when I grow up. Lila smiled gently. You don't have to wait to grow up, she said. You can start being kind right now. Help someone carry something. Say hi to someone who looks lonely. That's how it starts. The boy nodded, very serious. Okay, he said, and ran. Off. Mrs. Harper chuckled. He's got a spark now. Just like you. Lila looked out over the street, over porches where neighbors now sat side by side, sharing food and stories, over gardens they had planted together, over fences they had painted as a group. She saw people, not just houses, and she thought, this is what it means to belong. That evening, as the party wound down, Lila sat with her mom on their front steps, legs tucked under a blanket. Do you think other streets could be like this? She asked. Tanya looked out at the glowing windows and warm lights across Maple Street. I think they could, she said. All it takes is one person to care loud enough that it makes other people listen. Then I want to be that person, Lila whispered. You already are, her mom said, pulling her close. The stars began to come out one by one. In a world full of big news and loud voices, nobody would ever write a headline about a girl who waved at a neighbor, but on Maple Street they'd never forget, because Lila didn't just save a life. She changed lives by noticing, by staying, by reminding people they weren't alone. And long after the cookies were eaten and the paint dried, the story of that quiet, kind girl lived on in the smiles of every neighbor who had once been a stranger. Because sometimes, the bravest people are the ones who show up with nothing more than a big heart and a bike.